Καλωσορίσω στη σημερινή διάλεξη από τον καθηγητή του Πανεπιστήμιου Ben Gurion στο Ισραήλ, καθηγητή Allan Degen. Η διάλεξη θα είναι στα αγγλικά. Μπορούμε φυσικά να ακολουθήσει η συζήτηση, οπότε αν υπάρχει οτιδήποτε θα το δούμε μετά τη διάλεξη. Κάποια λόγια για τον καθηγητή. Ο καθηγητής έχει σπουδάσει στον Καναδά αρχικά, από όπου και κατάγεται, και έχει κάνει το διδακτορικό του στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Τελ Αβίβ το 1976 και βρίσκεται από το 1980 στο Πανεπιστήμιο Ben Gurion της ερήμου Negev, όπου είναι και καθηγητής στο τμήμα προσαρμοστικότητας ζώων της ερήμου και ζωικής παραγωγής. Έχει περισσότερες από 200 δημοσιεύσεις σε έγκριτα περιοδικά, καθώς και συνέδρια, και είναι μέλος αρκετών συμβουλίων του Ισραήλ. Είναι editor-in-chief του Israel Journal of Zoology και είναι μέλος αρκετών ενώσεων. Okay, so I'd like to welcome Professor Allan Degen to the Insitute, the Agricultural Research Institute, and we look forward to hear about Bedouin livestock production in the desert of Negev.
Okay. I'll tell you general talk about the Bedouin and their livestock production in Israel in the Negev desert. We're a small group, so that if you have any questions, just stop me, or there's something you don't understand, you can just speak out as you wish, and I'll try to answer questions. Or if you want to move in some direction that I'm not moving in, just let me know, and I'll try to accommodate the wishes of the people here. I've been working with the Bedouins in the Negev now for about 35 years on their livestock production. A little history. Before the State of Israel in 1948, there were about 65,000 Bedouins. After the state was formed and many ran, and for various reasons, there were 11,000 left in 1948-49. Today, closing in on 200,000 Bedouins in the Negev. The growth rate is about 5% per year, which is about the fastest in the world, or any other country, just to give you an idea of the numbers. About 50, they're mainly non-nomadic now. They used to be nomadic. They are now perhaps semi-nomadic, semi-extensive, in which they live at a household and they move around part of the year. About 50% live in cities now, in 7 cities that were formed in Israel, and about 50% live in what are called spontaneous hamlets, of which consist of shacks with no running water usually and no electricity. There are about 46 of these unrecognized villages. They have between 200,000 to 300,000 sheep and goats, of which 1,300 are registered with the government. By being registered, that means that they are vaccinated yearly, and so they are numbered, and the veterinary services have an idea of where the animals are, the identification, and the number. We'll talk a little about that a little later. They own about 5,000 camels. There used to be many more, but the number of camels have gone down drastically. They used to be used for transportation and for plowing fields and for work. Today, pickup trucks and tractors are much more desirable, so the number of camels have gone down. And they also have cows, donkeys, and poultry.
Excuse me, of the total number of flocks, of sheep and goat flocks, what is the percentage of registered ones?
1,300 are registered.
Yes.
And that's the 200,000 sheep. The other 300, what they're saying 300,000 sheep, is probably 100,000 are not registered. They're kept around the house, and rather than pay for the vaccination fees and all that, they would prefer to keep the animals to themselves, not pay the vaccination fees, and not have the authorities know that they have sheep. There's always the taxation problem and things of this sort, so they prefer to keep them without registering. 200,000 is the official number. The veterinary services feel that between 300,000 to 400,000 is probably the actual number of animals that they have. Okay. Let me tell you a little bit about Israel, for those who are not familiar with Israel. The length of the country is about 550 kilometers. So with the roads in Israel today, you can drive the whole country probably in under 6 hours. I talked about it. The width in the narrow points are under 20 kilometers, 15 to 20 kilometers. So that's the length and the width. There's one freshwater lake in Israel that supplies all the freshwater drinking water. In Israel, that's the Lake Tiberias, or Kinneret, up on top. Much of the water down, the city of Eilat down on the bottom, gets all the water from desalination. The water is desalinated from the Red Sea down the bottom. There's a desalination plant in Ashkelon along the Mediterranean Sea. And there are boats going from Haifa to Cyprus almost daily. So that's where we are. There's the Dead Sea area, which is the lowest point in the world. It's about 400 meters or so below sea level. And we're talking about the Negev desert, where all the Bedouins that I'll be talking about today live. We're talking about the strip between, well, the point between the north part of the Gaza Strip, right across to just under Iraq. Okay, this area over here. It's about 60% of the country, and it has about 10 to 15% of the population of the country. Now, rain-wise, we're talking about in the Gaza Strip area, the coming south and east as we're going along, the rainfall decreases. It decreases from about 250 millimeters of rainfall per year to about 25 millimeters of rainfall a year in Eilat. We have the Rift Valley going up, goes through Eilat, starts in Mozambique and goes into Kenya, Ethiopia, the Red Sea, along through the Dead Sea into Syria, ends off in Turkey. It's probably just about the most extreme desert in the world, one of the most extreme deserts in the world as far as dryness and heat. The temperatures go up to 45 degrees plus in the summer. Many years without rainfall at all, but perhaps the most intensive and most productive agriculture is carried out in this area here. Mainly with greenhouses, sophisticated irrigation systems that they use, the drip systems, and their specialty is fruits and vegetables out of season. In particular, peppers, a lot of aquaculture here of prawns and shrimps. There's a lot of tilapia that are grown here very, very, very intensively. And just a lot of agriculture. My university is situated, we have two campuses. There's one at Beersheba, you can see just almost in the middle of the Negev desert. Just below that there's our campus at Stable Care, where I do much of my research. And we have a campus down at Eilat for marine research. Any questions on the general topography? What's happening? Okay. Wow. Camels used to be much more important than they are today. They're still quite important. In fact, the importance of camels have increased in the last few years, mainly for its milk. It's mainly for its milk and milk products. There are several companies now that make a cream, a skim cream, out of the milk itself for export mainly to Germany, I understand, and for drinking. Many of the Bedouins keep a number of camels. This particular fellow has well over 100 camels, and he drinks milk daily, and he claims that it keeps him in good stead. It should. He has 3 wives and 41 kids, so if you're wondering what his status is. The milk is very high in vitamins, especially vitamin B12, and the rest of the products are used as well. And you even start off with the urine of the camel. It used to be very important. The women put it in their hair. They used to rub it in their hair, and it gave them a better shine, a better shine, and made the hair stronger. There's a claim, there's research being done now in the University of Saudi Arabia that it has anti-carcinogenic properties. And actually in Yemen, it is sold in packages to be drunk. They actually drink this urine, and I understand now in Africa, in Ethiopia, the Afars drink the camel urine as well, and it's supposed to be healthy for them. In Yemen, like I said, it's packaged. The milk is actually packaged in Saudi Arabia, and it's sold in cartons. So there's a much more importance being put on camels today. Of course, the feces are used for fire and for burning till today, and the wool, the original tents that you saw, the Bedouin tents, which were white and black. The white used to be camel wool, and the black used to be goat hair. Of course, today it's rare to see that. You don't see that very often today. We'll just go through some pictures now, some camels. Some camel, you can see some of the camel production. Milk is done in a haphazard way. They usually either one of the boys or one of the men will milk the animal, and they'll drink it.
Can we have some more loud, Baragan?
I'm sorry?
Can we have the microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Louder?
I'm sorry. Okay. Just some pictures of some camels being milked, and they usually graze extensively. Most of the year they're allowed to wander around. Very few are used for riding. They're more of a traditional type animal today, in which at weddings they'll bring some camels, and they'll ride the camels. As you can see, I had some guests from Nepal, and they're drinking camel milk, and they seem to be enjoying it. The problem with camels, of course, is the low prolificity. Gestation is 13 months, so that at best they produce once every 2 years. And this is one of the big drawbacks of the camels. Sheep and goats. The sheep that we have in Israel, the Bedouins, is usually the Awasi fat-tailed sheep. It's used for used to be used for wool, meat, and milk. The wool has become non-economical. The animals are shorn and the wool is basically thrown away today. The meat is the important factor, and the milk, in most cases, the labor, it's too labor intensive, and many of them are not milked because of the problem of having someone to actually milk the animals. They produce in the vicinity of 50 to 80 liters of milk per lactation. Prolificity is not very high. At best, you'll get 1 lamb per ewe, usually less. Twinning is about 1.03, 1.04, very low. New genes have been brought in, or new breeds have been brought in to try and improve the prolificity. The Dorper has been introduced from South Africa. Romanov came in that produced 3 to 4 lambs per lambing. The Finn was introduced, but the Finn had problems with respiratory problems and didn't do very well. So there are some crosses. There are merino crosses, so you have quite a few merino crosses in. The problem with many of these crosses is that the Iwasi male, the local male, can move the tail of the animal in order to mate. These other animals, the other breeds cannot, and they just cannot mate without human intervention and human help. As you can see here, there's you can see some of the I believe some of the Dorper blood in there, and these are all Iwasis. They run together with sheep and goats, and the general practice of raising these animals is that they have to be vaccinated. January, February, the animals have to be vaccinated. Or let's say from December, January, February, the animals have to be vaccinated. They have to be vaccinated against brucellosis, foot and mouth, and rinderpest. Those are essentials. They have to do that. Some of them also do it against the sheeppox, and they just drench the animals against parasites. This has to be done in December, January. Then the animals get their ear tags identified, and they are then allowed to leave the area of their household depending on the primary production, the amount of rain. The government then allots different sections to different Bedouins, and they can leave from about February till the following September, October. They can leave their household, in which they set up a tent somewhere out away from their household, and then they have to be back by October, November for the vaccinations again. So that's the general cycle that they have. Usually in February to March, April, there's still enough green vegetation around where the primary production is still quite high. April starts drying off. April, May becomes very dry, and then it becomes much more difficult for the animals. Some of them then rent land where there was some sort of grain being grown, and they feed on the aftermaths. Some come home and they actually purchase the grain for the feed for the animals. A very common feed is either one of the either wheat or barley, which they soak in water. They soak it in water. It gets much larger, and they add then they add bran, leftover bran, to this, and sometimes some straw aftermath as well, so they're fed. you can see they're usually young girls that look after the animals, and they shepherd the animals. You see here the goats are much better browsers than the sheep, as it's usually known. The goats will actually climb and they'll eat some of the, there's a lot of acacia trees around, so they'll eat some of the acacia trees.
Which breeds of goats do you have? The breeds of the goats? Which breeds?
They're called Negev, which is the Negev breed.
Do you have mixed flocks?
Pardon me?
Mixed flocks?
Yes.
Or separate? Or mixed?
Mixed flocks. Mixed flocks.
Is it better?
I think it's much better because you see, as you can see here, the goats can browse on the trees where the sheep cannot, and so there is some sort of difference in their diet. And we'll talk about. I'll go over to some of the research that we're doing, so we'll get away from some of this anthropological stuff. But the goats can browse on food that the sheep cannot, and so that they're a mixture of the animals can get a much larger number of animals per unit area than any one of the breeds by itself, I think. They're marketed. They're usually the important part is the Muslim holidays, which is Eid al-Adha, 70 days after Ramadan, in which the lambs or a goat is slaughtered. The sheep has to be 6 months of age in order to be slaughtered on Muslim holiday. The goat has to be 1 year of age, if anyone is of interest, so that very often the goat meat is a little on the old side, and they like to market the sheep at 60 kilos, 50, 60 kilos, which is going well over a year, and sometimes it gets about tough on the smelly side. I've been trying to convince them to market it at a much earlier age, but unsuccessful so far. And this is a market in one of the cities. Again, for sheep and goats, and quite common. Animals being sold. The slaughtering of the animals is, just we'll go through. They're used in a lot of. Different ceremony for circumcision, for births, for deaths, during funerals, parties, weddings. There used to be a time, things have changed very drastically. I'll tell you a little about them. Things have changed very drastically in the Bedouin lifestyle. Economics have taken over. A wedding, it wasn't uncommon to have 40 to 50 sheep slaughtered at a wedding. Then they make these traditional plates in which they serve the food. Today they've started using calves instead. They slaughter calves, and it's mainly economical. I think it's about 3 to 4 times more expensive to use sheep than it is to use calf meat. So that's what they started doing today. They just boil the meat, and then you can see they put it on these big plates where people eat. Milk is still one of the important items in many of these families. The Bedouins have usually a number of children go running out. One of them catches the animal, and there's someone who's going to milk the animal. And this is a wonderful sight to see if you ever get to Israel. You'll have about, sometimes 15, 20 children running around, and about 3 or 4 people milking, and it's really it's really nice to see. Here again, you can see. Now, what do they do with this milk? The first thing they'll do is they'll put it into a large container and they'll leave it overnight. The first thing they'll churn it. They'll churn the milk. It used to be, the churn itself used to be made out of, inverted goat skin, and then it went to a stainless steel churn in which they roll back and forth. And today they have these electric churns made in Turkey that they use. I think I might have photos of all of them. And they, after they churn it, they'll take out all the butter, so that they have just the curds that are left, fat-free curds. And they'll make ghee out of the butter. They'll heat it and they'll make ghee out of the butter. And they'll make the whey, they'll just throw it away. They don't do anything with the whey. But the curd itself, they'll let it stand for quite a while in a plastic bag, and the water will drip out. And after they've collected enough of it, they'll make these balls which are fat-free, called a fiq in the language, and they'll let it dry. And this thing lasts forever. It's hard as a rock. You need a hammer to break it, and it's quite salty. And we're told it's good in Greek salad. So here, well, this is the churning in stainless steel. They lost a churn, in which there's, you see the opening on the top, and she'll just take the butter out from the top as she goes along. Here you see her again. This is making after it's dried, she'll make these balls, as you can see here, and then this will dry into a hard curd type cheese, which is fat-free. It's 0% fat. It's a little salty, and it lasts forever. It lasts till the next year anyway, till they're doing it. Shearing of the sheep very often is done by the older girls or the men, and it's left now to be thrown away. It's sometimes used for filling for covers or for pillows or something, but other than that, it's not used. Here you can see the shearing. Here's a family shearing. There's a whole family that's got together and shearing the animals. Milk is sometimes been introduced. This is something that is very foreign to Bedouins. They never knew, they never had it, and never kept cows, but now it's becoming more popular. Chickens. This is a woman's thing in which they raise some chickens and eggs, and then we'll go to there's a Thursday market in Beersheba. Also a nice thing to see if you people ever get there. So you can see the transactions among the Bedouin women and their customers. See. Donkeys. Another thing that they'll use, and you notice he has a cell phone on his waist. On his waist, this photo here. He still rides his donkey. Donkeys are used to bring food for the sheep and goats. This is just the straw being chopped up that will be fed to the animals. Straw being prepared for the animals. Let me just give you a touch of some of the research we're doing. Do we have time? 2 minutes, 5 minutes? 10? 5? Okay, I'll do it quickly. If you have any questions, please. How can I get rid of this? Let me tell you a little bit about the research we're doing with these animals, and this is perhaps goes back to your question. We wanted to see the seasonal diet selection, digestibility in sheep and goats, and what the differences are between these two groups. Okay, so what basically happens in the from about February, March, you have the first rains. The rains fall in Israel starting about December, January. They go to about March, April, and that's the only rain we have. There's no summer rains. You'll never, if you ever make a party, you have no worries about rain falling or rain coming in. It'll always be dry. The only rain we'll have is between December and March. It's winter rainy season, Mediterranean season. Then we have, when the ephemeral plant production starts, you have about 5 weeks of green vegetation. It dries up very, very quickly after that. What happens then is that the grazing intensity is very high as the primary production increases in both sheep and goats, and then it decreases greatly after that. You see? And you can see what's happening here is that when good primary production is available, both sheep and goats prefer the primary production and not the sheep, not the trees and shrubs. But as the vegetation becomes drier and more difficult to collect, you can see the top one is the goats and the bottom one is the sheep. The goats will go much more towards the trees and shrub intake, and the sheep will insist on trying to maintain mainly grasses as long as possible until it gets to a point where they have to try and eat some of the trees and shrubs. And at that point, about 7 to 8 weeks after the primary production starts, some supplementary feed has to be given to the animals. So what we try to do is get the necessary energy requirements for the animals. We've used several methods to do this. One was the double labeled water method, which we won't go into. The other one is the heart rate to determine metabolic rate of grazing sheep. This has become much more popular in the last number of years. There are a number of universities and research stations that are using metabolic rate to determine the energy requirement, energy expenditures. The way it's done, this is setting up in the field. We're setting up in the field. There are our equipment. As you can see, okay, what you do is the way it's done is you measure the heart rate and oxygen consumption of the animals at the same time. The oxygen consumption then is converted to energy units. You then calibrate heart rate to oxygen consumption and energy intake, and through this calibration you can calculate the energy expenditure in free grazing animals. So the animals are monitored. As you can see, this is an example of one of my students actually that did the heart rate and the oxygen consumption of an animal simultaneously. You can see that they move along quite nicely most of the time. Of course, I'm showing you the example of one of the good examples. We have many that are total failures. And And then what you do is you calibrate. You calibrate the heart rate versus oxygen consumption or energy consumption, both in sheep and goats, and you get your calibration curves. And then you let the animal out in the field with a monitor, and the data logger the next day will give you a readout of the heart rate of the animal over several days. You can see a general pattern that happens. Overnight there's a big drop, then in the morning it comes up again. Overnight the big drop, starts grazing, big drop overnight. And so the pattern is repeated daily, which is quite nice. And then you can interpret this into the energy expenditure of the animals, and you can see, then you can actually calculate the carrying capacity of the land. And what we had was the sheep we were using was 544 kilojoules per kilogram, 0.575 per day, as opposed to 462 for the goats. We used alkaline profiles to estimate the intake of the proportion of the plant species that the animals were consuming. We won't go into too much detail. I'll just let you know that at the first point, the consumption of both grasses, trees, and shrubs were very similar between the sheep and the goats. As the season went on further along, the separation became quite noticeable in that the goats started eating much more shrubs and browse, and the goat and the sheep tried to stay with their grasses. Well, there's the differences in the weeks. We try to see the effects of high tannin feeds in both the sheep and goats. We're talking about Acacia salignaca here, which is about 13 to 14% tannins all told, but high protein, and probably has about 14 to 15% protein content as well. And you can see that the goats, the digestibility, both animals were very low, but the goats were much higher than in sheep. This is actually published in several papers if anyone's interested. We then treated it with PEG, with polyethylene glycol, which binds the tannins and neutralizes the negative effect. Well, we thought it neutralizes the negative effect of the tannins, and increased the metabolizable energy intake in both animals considerably, much more in the sheep than the goats, but the goats are still much higher than the sheep. That's it. Okay. I'll stop there. I'd be more than glad to entertain questions if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Allan, very much for a very good overview of Bedouin life, and especially when it comes to animal raising, and also very interesting research projects of free grazing animals.